Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone today to our APASA Cafe, which, as many of you know, is our nearly monthly colloquium featuring cutting edge Anabaptist scholarship. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm just thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Lindsay Ems, our speaker for today, who is an assistant professor of communication at Butler University. And Dr. Ems will be sharing more with us about her new book, Virtually Amish, Preserving Community at the Internet's Margins, which has recently been published by MIT Press. Congrats on that. I'd like to begin with just a quick thanks to Dr. Andrea Waxmansky, who is our APASA scholarship committee member and also kind of a technical guru who makes all of this happen. And we are so grateful for that. For those of you joining us for the first time, we just ask that you save your questions till the end or put them in the chat. And Dr. Ems is going to speak for about a half hour, and then that should allow us plenty of time for questions and conversation afterwards. If you do participate in the conversation after the presentation, your questions and comments will be recorded, and those recordings will be available only to our members on our website. The full talk will be available to everyone. And you can check that out, as well as access previous APASA cafes if you're interested at amishstudies.org. And so also, if you're joining us by phone and want to ask a question, you can do that by pushing *6. I notice we have a couple of phone folks here calling in, which is fantastic. And okay, well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Lindsay Ems. Dr. Ems, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your work with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Anytime I have the opportunity to share my research with knowledgeable groups such as you all, I jump at the opportunity. And so I'm honored that you guys have asked me to talk about my research. So to start, I'll tell you a little bit about how the project came to be, and then I'll start a slide deck, and hopefully I can manage 2 screens here, so bear with me. So I started this project as a young grad student in a communication and media studies program, and it started in approximately 2010 as a student in an ethnography of information class. And over spring break that year, I took my mom up to Shipshewana, Indiana, which is about 2.5 hours north of Indianapolis, where I live now. And I had this idea that I would complete a project for this class in which I would interview a few Amish people about their use of communication technologies. And I was overly optimistic, I think, in some ways, in thinking that this was going to be easy. However, I got really lucky in that first meeting and met a gentleman who was very interested in talking about these topics. And he kind of helped me then roll this into a much larger project, which ended up becoming my dissertation, and now a fully published book. So it's been a long process. And so, as I said before, it's always a wonderful opportunity when I get to talk about it and share with others. So my PhD was in media and communication. So I'm a media and communications scholar. And oftentimes I get asked, why are you interested in studying the Amish? And as most of you are fully aware, the Amish have sort of a reluctance to adopting digital communication technologies. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about why, when all the rest of us are often quick to adopt these technologies, the Amish choose not to. So that's kind of where I started with this project. Let me try and click on to my slide deck here. So I'm going to try and share my screen. See if I can make it just this. Let's see. I think I'll just go share. All right, can you all see that? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I thought I might start with a little how it started and how it's going to kind of give you a little bit more context about the project. So I dedicated about 10 years to this project, and so the book is now out, which is really, really exciting. So what are some of the main theoretical claims? So today my goal is really to give you an idea of what the book is about, its main theoretical claims, a description of the fieldwork, and some unique Amish approaches that I observed to resisting the negative impacts of high-tech capitalism. So as we go through, please do jot down any questions you might have so we can get to those. I really encourage this to be more of a conversation than a presentation. So I'm looking forward to having that once we're done with the slide deck here. So the theoretical contributions, let's jump right into that. So we're all using digital communication technologies more today than ever before to work, learn, socialize, take care of family, and be entertained. Often we see our abilities to do these things with technology as providing increased autonomy, freedom, and agency. And the fact is, this is an illusion. Because of the trends toward more intimate and ubiquitous digital technology use, power in our economy and society has shifted to surveillance capitalists and away from users. In other words, we are made to think we have more choices, often through tech company advertising, but we are only offered a limited set of choices that we can do through our smartphones and digital technology. So software companies are designing these limited set of options for us, and they kind of frame our ability to socialize and care for our families, along with working and learning, as we all kind of have experienced. So let me give you a few examples here. It's now commonplace to ask a smart speaker in our home to order dinner from our favorite restaurant, and the food will show up in our doorstep within an hour. Is that not increasing our freedom, right? Or is this not an expansion of our freedom? Similarly, we can choose to call our relatives who may live far away and see them on video, much like what we're doing right now. And this could be seen as relieving us of the trouble of traveling to have a conversation with someone whom we also can see, who we love and can see their facial expressions in person. Is this not an expansion of freedom? What we are missing, though, when we do take those kinds of, use these kinds of technologies, is that first, these kinds of conveniences are not available to everyone, right? They're only available to a small fraction of our society who has resources and is privileged. So buying our actions and choices made through technology, like buying food from a restaurant specifically approved by the technology company, or conversing with our family via screen, are limited and are presented to us and observed, by the way, by the technology's designer, which is a corporation. The corporation obviously hopes to benefit financially from our use of these tools. They design a purposely narrow set of standardized actions, which they hope will make us less likely in the future to make dinner, to exercise our creative energies, or to organize social gatherings where homemade food is shared and not observable through technology. So if we find it unnecessary to travel and connect emotionally with friends and colleagues and family, our connections to one another weaken, while our dependence on these large-scale anonymous corporations becomes more strong and kind of central to our ability to do these things. So this book that I have just written and published over the last 10 years is an effort to examine a group of people who are doing collective, explicit work to resist these kinds of trends and their impacts on individual and collective well-being. So many social theorists who examine the negative impacts of digital communication technologies on human well-being have noted that what the Amish seek to resist in the hyper-connected world around them. Notably, these technologies, theorists have noted that they accelerate our experience of time and place by fragmenting people from nature and one another. They contribute to the alienation of workers by making their labor invisible and underpaid. And people who work in high-tech capitalism report feeling increased stress and anxiety, increased feelings of loneliness, and an inability to fashion a long-term narrative of one's life. So these are all claims that social theorists have made about technology, which the Amish have also are also aware and have kind of developed strategies to make use of technologies in ways that resist those negative forces. So, let's see, social theorists, all right, sorry, I lost my place here. So there are very few modern examples of everyday people who have found a sweet spot in which their participation in the high-tech economy allows them to acquire the resources they need to fulfill their social, cultural, and political desires, whether or not they align with the systems, right? The technology companies and these corporations and this global information infrastructure that has been designed that we all depend upon now to do our work, care for our families, et cetera, in today's society and economy. The Amish are doing just this. So they participate in the global economy while maintaining cultural, spiritual, and ideological autonomy in defiance of what Shoshana Zuboff in her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, calls Big Other. And she is referring here to an instrumentarian superpower that reigns over today's high-tech society that reduces human experience to measurable, observable behavior while remaining steadfastly indifferent to the meaning of that experience. I highly recommend her book, by the way. It's really kind of core to where I started to make sense of what the Amish were doing with the technologies that I saw in the field. So in resisting the rule of Big Other, Zuboff outlines the need for a right to sanctuary. She beautifully describes her home as fulfilling the role of refuge, where secluded bodies lay and breathe together and spirits take root. For the Amish, their charge is to create a larger ideological and spiritual realm in which church groups and families can collectively dwell together. To do this, they configure communication systems so that desirable packets of information are encouraged to flow throughout the system and the community, and undesirable packets are prevented from entering. The goal here is to create a social and cultural sanctuary where their way of life can thrive while resisting the authority of Big Other. As you guys know, Amish communities today are undergoing drastic economic changes, and the cost of farmland is going up, and it's now nearly impossible to make a living on a small farm, as once was the venerated profession among the Amish. And people in more progressive communities today have entered into a wide array of other businesses. And so we have tourism, manufacturing, cottage industries, et cetera, et cetera. And technology adoption in these areas is taking off, and it's starting to spread into the personal spheres as well. In many communities, the adoption of new technologies like cell phones and computers is very controversial. And cell phone adoption in many cases is seen as a serious issue worthy of much deliberation and concern. So in general, when I ask people in the field what shaped their philosophies about technology use, and this is a picture from northern Indiana where I did most of my field work in the Shipshawana settlement. When I asked people what guided their technology use, this was a common thread that I heard from many. So we want to control our technology, not be controlled by it. Most Amish communities today are connected by the rejection of electricity that's supplied via the public power grid, television, radio, automobiles, and modern clothing fashions. It's a myth, however, that Amish do not use new technologies. In my study of the Amish, which I'll describe more in a minute, I talked on the phone and texted back and forth with Amish participants. Many Amish businesses are now using computers, which I have learned, and I've learned that some members of Amish communities use smartphones in much the same way that you and I do. Many young Amish people are texting and using social media, and a large number of Amish people frequent public libraries to use the internet, where they email, buy things on Amazon, check Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. They're also checking out books, ebooks, and videos for entertainment purposes. And some people I talked to were even using GPS technology for navigation in cars and buggies. And so much of the deliberation about using technology is inspired by the notion that the Amish should not be conformed to the world, right? Which comes from spiritual belief. And so in the past, I think the Amish have just decided, that they would not use technology in order to remain disconnected and unconformed. And today, in my observation and talking to folks, this has sort of changed a little bit. So I witness people no longer just building fences between themselves and the outside world, but really thinking about programming the information and the information system that they use to communicate, share beliefs, care for one another, et cetera, et cetera. So they were concerned that if they adopt a technology, and this is sort of the test that they would use in each community, and in each community it was the end result was different, is the question was, will this technology tear our families and communities apart or bring us closer? So in a lot of communities, high-tech barbecues were allowed because they were seen to bring people together in fellowship. Rollerblades, trampolines, those kinds of things were seen as ways for people to have fun together. And obviously radio television would not be adopted because that was seen as bringing corporate advertisers into a one-on-one kind of conversation with individuals, and that would bring people, separate them from one another and bring them into stronger relationships with anonymous corporate advertisers. So these are the places where I did my research. I spent a lot of time up in the northern Indiana, which is it's the Shipshewana, Elkhart LaGrange area. And I also spent quite a bit of time down in Daviess County in southern Indiana. And I did most of my field work during, I don't know if any of you are, I know some of you are in the Midwest, but we're in the Midwest around 2014, 13, 14. I think there was, it was just a very snowy, cold winter. The snowpocalypse is what they called it. And this was my car at the time, and this is what I used to navigate the roads in these kind of rural areas. So I learned how to drive in snow, which was has paid off over the years. So I would show up in the settlement, and I would use an Amish directory. And if you've seen those, they're like super thick books where people's names from the settlement are listed out. And often I would have a lead, and I would have a scheduled meeting with someone, and then I would ask them if they could connect me with anyone else they think would be interested in talking to me. And so it was a snowball sampling methodology where I would hope to get new leads from the people that I had previously talked to. And that worked out pretty well, actually. So I would go and I would write different addresses on Post-it notes and use my GPS to get from one place to the next in the settlement. So I did a qualitative ethnographic sort of data collection. I did semi-structured interviews with Amish church and business leaders primarily. And then I did a data analysis that followed a thematic case study approach. So it was basically a huge Excel spreadsheet. When I would see themes in interview responses, I would group those together. And that's sort of how I built out the different theories and concepts and trends that I outline in the book. So in northern Indiana, it's the third largest settlement next to Holmes County, Ohio, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So it's an understudied settlement, and still, one of the three biggest. In southern Indiana, Daviess County, and I think it's the 7th largest settlement, so it's still relatively large, and also not really been studied before. So it was about 50,000 people in the two settlements combined, and about 356 church districts. So these two settlements contained about 53% of Indiana's Amish population, and both are among the 8 largest settlements overall. So I talked to 45 people. 35 of them were Amish church leaders or business owners. 10 of them were not Amish. The average age of the participants were 56, and the length of the interview was about an hour. Okay, so let me dial my notes in here again. So I'd like to turn now to some of the unique approaches that I found during my fieldwork that were used by the Amish to resist the negative impacts of high-tech capitalism on their lives. Many more are outlined in the book, but I've chosen just a few here to kind of give you a glimpse of what you might see if you were to read the book. First, I'll describe two distinct approaches I observed in my interviews with Amish thought leaders with regard to their decisions to make rules about if and how to adopt new digital communication technologies like cell phones, smartphones, and computers. Mutual respect for differences and necessary consensus. So these are two explicit rulemaking processes that I'll describe here shortly. Then I'll explain a concept called critical making and show you some communication devices developed for the Amish by the Amish to help them do business in our high-tech world while still resisting the negative impacts of high-tech capitalism. So with regard to the rulemaking process in Amish communities, there were formal steps required in order to make a new device allowed or not allowed for use. According to one bishop in each district, when a new technology came about, the issue was brought into the ministry. Some church leaders would approve it and some would not. And this yielded a wide array and variety across districts. So church leaders might watch and see what other districts do and see whether it's something that they might adopt. Sometimes they would adopt it, sometimes they wouldn't. This was a quote from an Amish minister and also a business owner. This was especially true. So this mutual respect for differences was something I observed more in the northern Indiana settlement than the southern Indiana settlement. In this settlement, thought leaders did not have a problem with the differences from one community to the next. Their neighbors might have fully adopted cell phones while they decided not to, right? And that was totally okay. And I think they saw that as an advantage. So you could kind of see what was going on in one district and decide whether it was good for yours or not and make a decision accordingly. Many participants noted it was conventional to respect each other's churches that had adopted different technologies. And in fact, some church leaders did see this as an advantage. Let me see here. So this is another quote from an Amish minister. I'll be right up front. There's not always the same thought process or agreement, if you will, or levels of concern all the way across the board among church leaders. But you have that because you're dealing with humans. So usually it's talked about, it's thought about, it's prayed about. The days go on, and sometimes not everyone is in agreement. But again, that's because we're human. But I think that for the most part, the church leadership has the best interests of the community in mind. And as an example, there are some church areas that allow cell phones for the church membership. So that's another example of mutual respect for differences. And kind of the other end of the spectrum, I observed what I called necessary consensus. And this was something I observed more in the Daviess County, Southern Indiana settlement, where the thought was that each district should have the same rules about technology and what was adopted and what wasn't. So they would meet the bishops there would meet on a regular basis to kind of align their rules and ordinances so that each district kind of played by the same rules. So a quote that I got from an Amish bishop there was, "The community is going through a struggle right now to decide which direction they should go on the issue of technology and especially cell phones. One bishop is lenient and the next is opposed to cell phones." So trying to achieve this consensus across church districts, as you can read into this quote, was a bit of a struggle because you have people who are doing different types of work, have different views about technology, et cetera, et cetera. And another bishop felt this way. He said agreement was not always good. And so this was in the same settlement, but so he felt that agreement wasn't necessarily what they were after. It was better that they had collective action, that they would decide upon a path forward and agree that we move in that direction. So disagreements should be vocalized. Agreement could mean that no one was going along, but they might act as though they were to avoid conflict. So he was really more interested in having people work together and collaborate instead of just, the lip service of saying, yes, we'll all kind of align our ordnungs, because it didn't necessarily play out in reality that way. So there were, in my research in Southern Indiana, I did learn that there were differences of opinion across the board there. And the church leaders I spoke with all agreed that cell phones should not be adopted. Many church leaders decided not to meet with me there because they were afraid that if they would talk to me individually, there would be a difference of opinion that would be reported out in the book that I was writing. So that was something that was undesirable, and so many people just decided not to meet with me at all. So collective action was what was really the goal from at least one participant that I spoke with, that we would make compromises to our own personal opinions and move forward as a group. So in this way, the Northern Indiana and Southern Indiana settlements had different kinds of approaches to working across districts to adopt or reject technologies. For members of the Northern Indiana settlement, there was an ethos of mutual respect for difference that was allowed, that allowed some communities to adopt technologies and experiment, and others to sort of wait and see. In Southern Indiana, on the other hand, an ethos of necessary consensus permeated inter-district relationships. Peer pressure, it seemed, worked to ensure that technologies were or were not used according to shared beliefs. However, this stood in contrast to participants' reports of technology use. Many church leaders and business owners there reported that members of their community did own and use cell phones, even though they were not allowed to. Okay, so let's shift gears now to critical making. So critical making offers a new form of design through which the political qualities of an issue are materialized by participatory means. And I'll be looking at particular arrangements of technologies that were made for the Amish by the Amish to kind of get around the negative aspects of high-tech capitalism that they observed that would allow them still to work and live in the modern economy. So let me just give you some examples here. This is one that I saw called the black box phone. And this was in the Southern Indiana settlement. You can see there's a plywood box here. This is actually a landline phone that's hooked to a cellular device that connects this landline phone to the cell network. So it's a cell phone, it's a mobile phone. But it was intended for a construction crew. So it would be used by 5 workers that would all be in one vehicle. And they went out to do their construction job on site. And they would use this for safety or, just to have a way to communicate. And they would share it. So it was a communal device. It was not personal. You couldn't tuck it into your pocket. There's no texting, no video, no internet. It's inconvenient. It forces public conversation. So this was a technology that was designed to sort of limit and mitigate the negative aspects of a cell phone or a smartphone, but still make it possible to use technology for the reasons they needed to. This I found in one of my participants' homes. This is actually in their bedroom. And it was an off-grid cell phone charger. So this looks like a normal cell phone charger that we might recognize, hooked up to a marine battery. So this was another workaround. So there's no connection to a public electrical grid. It's inconvenient. Yes, it is electricity, but for a specific purpose, not unlimited purposes. Plain computers. So there's an entire genre now of different types of PCs that are made for Amish people by Amish people. There's no internet, no games, no music on these devices, no outside programs, just nothing fancy, just a workhorse for your business is how they describe it in the ad. And this is the classic word processor. That was the older ad, a newer ad here. plain book, so the laptop version of this, no sound, no video, no internet, no games. And then these are all different varieties of the same kind of personal computer. So cell phones also, so cell phone, plain phones, no games, no camera, no internet, no text messaging, just a plain flip phone. There's another service that I witnessed, that I heard about from participants called PC Free Mail, which is basically, if I take a piece of paper and draw on it, I can send it as an email through my fax machine. So if fax machines have been adopted in a particular community, then I can use my fax machine basically to send and receive email. Okay, so these kind of configurations of technologies and workarounds, I think, help protect the cultural sanctuary that they don't want to be kind of penetrated by big other and the negative aspects of high-tech capitalism that we discussed sort of earlier on in the presentation. So the decisions to use technology for Amish purposes help to connect to the world for the purposes of doing work and acquiring the resources that they need for survival, and also they make these sort of limitations on devices, though, to preserve strong local support networks, their culture, and a way of life. So whether by mutual respect for difference or necessary consensus, these strategies aim to protect cultural autonomy, emphasize holism, simplicity, spirituality, a slow pace of life, tradition, and heritage. And they limit big others' influences by working to protect a way of life in which people feel at peace, that they have a purpose, that they are rooted and known. So these approaches, by limiting big others' influences, these facets, so these are the facets of Amish culture that they feel empower them most. And this is, I think, true for Amish and non-Amish people alike. So this book suggests that Amish resistance is comprised of mundane, everyday practices that have macro level political implications. That the Amish actively make decisions about technology that rest on their unique moral, spiritual, and faith-based values, puts them precisely outside of big others' reign of power. And in this way, they're resisting surveillance by this new authority and do not consent to the rewriting of the religious faith-based texts and identities. And this protects their cultural autonomy in an increasingly global and interconnected world.